I have worked for Caspian Aldred, the Duke of Tharwick, for 11 years, and in that time I have watched him face down a creditor's tribunal, survive 3 London seasons without once dancing, dismiss 2 solicitors for incompetence, and eat a plate of cold mutton at a state dinner rather than complain to his host. He is not a man given to falling apart. So when he fell apart, and he did fall apart, quietly, thoroughly, and with a stubbornness that would have impressed a lesser man, I felt it was my duty to observe the process carefully and in time to do something about it. This is the account of that falling apart, and of the woman who caused it, and of the 60 miles of coastal road between Aldrath Hall and Thornhaven that he was eventually, with considerable coaxing from me, persuaded to cross. Her name was Emmeline Voss. She arrived on a Tuesday in early October, which I know because it was the Tuesday the kitchen cat had her kittens and cook was distracted, and the soup at luncheon was undersalted, and the Duke made no comment on it, which tells you something about the state of the house by then. The Duchess, his mother, not a wife, for there had never been a wife, a fact which is somewhat pertinent to this story, had been ill since the spring. She was a small, clever woman who had spent 40 years managing her son's comfort and had declined, these last months, in a way that was dignified and very slow and very hard on everyone who looked at her. The companion she had asked for was sent up from a Bristol agency. Emmeline Voss, aged 26, niece of the Reverend Elias Voss of Porthcarn, no parents living, references from 3 previous households. She came with 1 trunk and a carpet bag and a good umbrella, and she shook my hand when I met her at the door as if she were meeting an equal, which I found sensible. She was not remarkable to look at, if you looked quickly. She was of middle height, with brown hair she wore in a plain knot and gray eyes that gave nothing away, and a face that was not the sort of face that caused heads to turn at first. What it did, that face, was make you look twice, and then a third time. And then you found yourself looking across the room at supper wondering what she was thinking, which, for a household that had been subdued and sad for 6 months, was something almost alarming in its ordinariness. She simply made the room feel as though thought was still possible. She sat with the Duchess every morning and read to her from a rotating selection of histories and natural philosophy, and on Fridays, a novel that the Duchess had chosen with great care, and that Emmeline read with perfect seriousness, never once smiling at the wrong moments. She reorganized the Duchess's correspondence into a system that the Duchess could navigate without her spectacles. She taught herself the names of every servant in the house within 10 days, including the boot boy and the undercook, which is the sort of thing that seems small and is not small at all. She took her meals in the housekeeper's parlor and made no complaint and asked for nothing. I noticed all of this because it is my business to notice. The Duke noticed it for a different reason, or rather, he noticed something, some peripheral fact of her presence, and then proceeded to pretend that he had not noticed anything at all, which is the way he handles most things that matter to him. The first time she argued with him, it was over a letter. I was in the Duke's study collecting his morning coat when she knocked and entered. She did not wait. She knocked and entered in one movement, which was her way, and placed a correspondence on his desk that his secretary had filed incorrectly. "Your Grace," she said, "this letter from your land agent at Moorcroft's arrived 3 weeks ago and has been in the wrong stack. It concerns the southern drainage, and it requires your answer before the winter or the lower field will flood." The Duke looked at her. "How do you know about the southern drainage?" he said. "Your mother receives the estate reports, Your Grace. She likes to know the house is in order." "My mother is ill." "Yes," said Emmeline, "which is why I read them to her. She still prefers to know." A pause in which Caspian Aldred, Duke of Tharwick, a man who had not been contradicted in his own study in living memory, looked at the letter and then at her, and then at the letter again. "I will attend to it," he said. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said and left. He did attend to it, within the hour. I did not say anything, but I brought him his tea with more warmth than usual, which he ignored, as he ignores most expressions of warmth, but which I offered nonetheless. That was October. November passed in a quiet way. The house ran, the Duchess faded slowly, Emmeline moved through the corridors at her particular unhurried pace, and the Duke read the land reports his mother received without, apparently, noticing that he was now reading land reports. December came with frost. The Duchess died on the 17th of December, early in the morning, in the way that people die when they have had time to make their peace, quietly, and with their hands folded, and with someone sitting beside them. That someone was Emmeline. I don't know whether the Duke knew this at the time. I know he knew it eventually because I told him, and he did not speak for a long moment after I told him, which was itself an unusual thing. The funeral was small. The estate went into mourning. The Duke dealt with the lawyers and the tenants and the correspondence with his customary efficiency and showed nothing, which is the only way he has ever known how to carry grief, which is to say he carries it the way a man carries a stone in his coat pocket. You can see by the set of his shoulders that something is heavy, but he will not name it. In the second week of January, the new household steward, a man named Corrigan whom the Duke's solicitor had recommended, made the calculation that, with the Duchess gone, there was no longer a requirement for a companion, and dismissed Emmeline with 2 weeks' wages and a reference, as politely as it is possible to dismiss someone. It was Mrs. Peel, the housekeeper, who told me. She came to find me in the linen corridor in a state of contained outrage. "Mr. Corrigan has let Miss Voss go," she said. "Paid her out this morning. She goes Friday." I will not pretend that I didn't feel it. Emmeline had become, in 3 months, the kind of person a household bends around, not because she demanded it, but because she was useful in ways that were not immediately visible until she was no longer there to be useful. The Duchess had loved her. The boot boy brought her the kitchen cat's best kitten, and she had kept it. Cook deferred to her opinions on menus, which was an honor cook extended to no one. "Does the Duke know?" I said. Mrs. Peel gave me the look that meant, "Does the Duke know anything that he has not been directly told by a solicitor in writing?" I went to tell him. He was at his desk, which is where he always is in the afternoons, writing letters or pretending to write letters. I told him what Corrigan had done. He heard me out. He set his pen down in the particular way he has, precisely, without haste, and looked at the middle distance. "She has a good reference," he said. "She does," I said. "And her wages are in order." "They are." A pause. "Then Corrigan has acted correctly," he said, and picked up his pen. I stood for a moment. I am, as I have said, 11 years in this man's service, and I have learned that there are moments when the correct thing to do is to say one more true thing and then be quiet. So I said the one more true thing. "Your Grace," I said, "she sits with your mother every evening for 3 months. She keeps the estate reports in order without being asked. She knows the names of every person in this house. And you have not, in all that time, once spoken to her outside of business. You might before Friday thank her." He looked at me. "That will be all, Gideon," he said. That was Wednesday. On Thursday evening, as far as I know, he did not go to the housekeeper's parlor. On Thursday evening he was in his study until late. I saw the light under the door. Emmeline left on Friday before dawn. She left a note for Mrs. Peel, a separate note for Cook, and a third one which Mrs. Peel showed me with a look addressed to no one, which said, "Thank you for Aldrath. I was glad to be here." She left the kitchen cat's kitten with the boot boy, who cried. She took her trunk and her carpet bag and her good umbrella, and she hired the village carrier to take her to the crossroads, and from the crossroads she took the southbound coach. She did not leave a note for the Duke. I found out she was gone when I brought the Duke his morning shaving water at 7, and he asked, without looking at me, whether Miss Voss had been seen at breakfast. I told him she had left that morning. He received this information with the stillness of a man who has been struck by something he did not expect, and then he said, "I see," and held out his chin for the razor, and I shaved him, and neither of us spoke. That was the end of it, or it was, if you believe that things can end. What followed, and I say this as a man of measured temperament, who has observed the Duke of Tharwick across 11 years of impeccable self-possession, was one of the stranger seasons of my professional life. It began subtly. The Duke ate less at dinner. Not dramatically, he is not a dramatic man, but I have set his table for 11 years, and I know when a portion goes back to the kitchen largely untouched. The first week I noted it and said nothing. The second week I mentioned to cook that his grace seemed not to have much appetite and perhaps a lighter hand on the cream sauces. The third week the Duke came down to breakfast, looked at the sideboards, and went back upstairs without eating anything at all. He slept badly. I know this because he rings for me irregularly when he does not sleep, wanting his night candle replaced or a book fetched. And in the 3 weeks after Emmeline left, he rang for me 9 times between 11 at night and 4 in the morning, which was 9 more times than he had rung in the entire previous year. He wrote letters. This is not unusual for a duke. There is always correspondence, but these were different. I knew they were different because he wrote them in the evening, after the estate correspondence was finished on smaller sheets of paper, and he did not send them. I found 2 in the fireplace, unburned, simply set there and then left, as if he had put them there meaning to burn them and then could not be bothered even to carry out the disposal. I did not read them. I am not that sort of valet. But they were there, and they were not estate business, and they were not finished. He wrote out 3 times with no clear destination. The first time I assumed he was checking the southern field drainage, which was, after all, his stated business. The second time there was no business, and he came back after 4 hours with the horse in a light sweat, and a look on his face that I had not seen before. The third time I saddled his horse for him and asked, as casually as a man can ask such things, whether he would be going far. "No," he said, and rode south on the Thornhaven Road, which is not the road to the drainage field or to any of the estate farms, and came back 2 hours later and went directly to his study. It was around this time that Mr. Corrigan committed the error of mentioning, at supper with the upper staff, that the household was running admirably without the companion, and that the economy of the gesture had been sound. I was present. I said nothing. Mrs. Peel, who was also present, refilled her own glass with a precision that suggested she was exercising considerable restraint. It was the 4th week when I decided that something had to be done. I will say, in my defense, that I tried the gentle approach first. I waited until I was dressing the Duke for dinner, an evening when he had no guests, which meant the dinner was essentially theater for an audience of 1, and I said, while adjusting his cuffs, "Mrs. Peel has heard that Miss Voss reached her destination safely." The Duke was quiet for a moment. "That is good to know," he said. "She has written to Mrs. Peel," I said. "She seems to be settled." Another pause. "Good," he said. "She is at Thornhaven," I said, "the harbor town." He turned to look at me. I looked back at him with the expression I use when I am not doing anything in particular, which is, as I have been told, not a convincing expression. "Gideon," he said. "Your Grace," I said. "Whatever you are about to say." "I wasn't going to say anything," I said. "I only mentioned it because you seemed as though you might want to know." He held my gaze for a moment with the look of a man who is very aware that his valet is the most honest person in the house and finds this inconvenient. "She is settled," he said. "That is the main thing." "It is certainly a thing," I agreed. He went to his dinner. He ate about a third of it, which was, by recent standards, an improvement. That was Thursday. On Friday I overheard something I was not meant to overhear. Or rather, I was in the corridor outside the library and the door was partially open, and I am a valet, not a spirit, and the laws of acoustics apply to me as to any man. The Duke was speaking to the estate rector, old Mr. Cavell, who called once a month. They were speaking of the Duchess, and of the winter, and then the rector said, in his mild way, that he had received a letter from his nephew in Thornhaven who had mentioned that a Miss Voss, was that not the Aldrath companion, had taken a clerking position at one of the shipping offices on the harbor front, on account of her good hand and her numbers. I heard the Duke say, a clerking position. It was not a question. It was the sound a man makes when something confirms a fear he had not been quite willing to name. Mr. Cavell said something about it being very sensible for a young woman in her position, and the Duke agreed that it was sensible, and then the rector departed, and the house was quiet. I went to prepare the Duke's evening clothes and found him standing at the window of his dressing room, which faces south. He was not looking at the grounds. He was looking at the horizon, which, if you stand at that window and look south, is approximately the direction of Thornhaven. I said nothing. I laid out his coat and his cravat and his shoes. I said as I turned to go, the Thornhaven road is 60 miles, your grace, clear going in 3 hours by a decent coach. The weather is tolerable this week. He did not turn around. Gideon, he said. Your grace. You are remarkably free with your opinions for a valet. I have been told this before, I said. A long silence. She doesn't know I'm coming, he said, which was, and I say this with the full weight of 11 years of experience, the closest Caspian Aldred had ever come to admitting out loud that he intended to do something about a feeling. No, I said, she doesn't. She may prefer not to see me. She may, I said. She is, in my experience, a woman who knows her own mind, so you'd best go and find out. He turned from the window. He had the look he gets when he has made a decision, not the look of a man who is pleased about it, but the look of a man who has stopped pretending the decision isn't already made. Order the hired coach for 7 in the morning, he said. You'll come. Naturally, I said. We left Aldrath Hall at 7 on a morning in early February, which is, in that part of the country, a gray and cold and entirely unromantic time of year, with the frost still on the verge grass and the sky the color of old pewter. The Duke sat across from me in the coach and read, or appeared to read. I noticed he did not turn a page for 30 miles, which is not the habit of an attentive reader. I managed the luggage arrangements and the change of horses at Tharwick, and did not comment on the pages. I am a circumspect man, or try to be. The road to Thornhaven runs south along the inland side of the downs for the first 20 miles and then cuts west and begins to descend. And when it descends you get, on clear mornings, the first sight of the sea, a gray-silver line on the horizon that looks, in February, like the edge of a flat iron. Thornhaven sits at the bottom of that descent, a working harbor town of perhaps 4,000 souls, with a fish market and a wool exchange and 3 coaching inns and a row of shipping offices along the front, and a smell of salt and tar that hits you before you see the water. It is not a beautiful town. It is an honest one. I knew the district a little from a previous position. I knew that the shipping offices were on the south side of the harbor front, facing the quay, and that if she was clerking at one of them, she would likely be in the office during the working hours of the day. I said this to the Duke as we came down into the town. So we go directly, he said. I'd recommend it, I said, before you lose your nerve. He gave me a look that said he found that remark impertinent. I looked back at him in the way that says I stand by it. We had this particular exchange without words every 6 months or so, and it had never yet resulted in my dismissal, so I judged my position secure. The hired coach led us at the top of the harbor front, and I went ahead on foot to confirm which of the offices she was in. It took about 4 minutes of inquiry in a harbor town. Everyone knows everyone's business by the second week, and I came back to where the Duke was standing on the quay, very still, with the sea wind moving his coat, looking at the gray water. "Harcourt Shipping," I told him. "Second building from the corner. She has a window that faces the quay." He nodded. He had gone very composed, which is what happens to him when things matter. All the restless weeks, the unfinished letters, the untouched plates, all of it had drawn back behind his face, and what was left was the Duke of Tharwick, who does not fall apart in public, who is in all things deliberate, who had come 60 miles to say something and was now going to say it. "Wait here," he said. "I rather thought I'd come," I said. He looked at me. "She deserves a witness," I said, "and if it goes badly, you'll want someone to manage the return coach." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come," and walked toward the second building from the corner. Harcourt Shipping occupied 2 rooms on the ground floor, with its counting office at the front, a long, low-ceilinged room smelling of ink and salt air, with 2 clerks' desks set against the window. The door was open. The Duke walked in first, and I came in behind him and stood near the door, which is where a good witness stands. There were 2 clerks. Emmeline Voss was one of them. She was at the window desk, which had the better light, writing figures into a ledger with a steady hand, and she was wearing a plain dark dress and no jewelry except a small pin at her collar, and her hair was in its usual knot. She looked, and I say this with the considered judgment of a man who had watched her at Aldраth for 3 months well. She looked as she had always looked, unhurried, self-contained, entirely herself. Whatever she had felt about leaving Aldраth, it did not appear to have diminished her. She heard the door. She looked up. There was a moment, a breath of a moment, in which something moved across her face that she controlled very quickly. Her expression settled into a careful composure that was not quite the same as the easy composure she had shown a second before, which told me what I had suspected. She was not unmoved. She simply was not a woman who allowed herself to be moved visibly without her own permission. "Your Grace," she said, and set her pen down neatly. The other clerk, a young man of about 20, looked up, registered a Duke, and became very interested in the ledger in front of him. The Duke said, "Miss Voss." A pause in which neither of them moved. "I was not aware I was expecting a visit," she said, which was polite and cool and perfectly measured. "No," said the Duke. "I came without announcement. I apologize for that." She looked at him steadily. She was not going to make it easy. She had left Aldраth Hall in the dark before dawn without a word to him, and she had taken a clerking post in a harbor town, and she had not sent for anyone, and she was not, it was clear, the kind of woman who would make it easy. "Is there something I can help you with, Your Grace?" she said. It was a good question. It was, in its way, a killing question, the kind that makes a man either speak plainly or retreat. I watched to see which it would be. Caspian Aldred, Duke of Tharwick, who had not begged for anything in his life and had not, to my knowledge, ever once admitted needing anyone, put his hat on the desk beside hers and said, "Yes, I think there is." She waited. "I should have thanked you," he said, "before you left, for everything you did for my mother, for the house." For he stopped and began again. "I should have thanked you, and I did not, and I am here because I find that I cannot. I find that the house is—" He stopped again. He was not a man who lost words easily. He looked for a moment like a man who has reached for something that ought to be simple and found it is not simple at all. He said quietly, "I find that I cannot stop thinking about you leaving." The young clerk at the next desk was now completely motionless. I gave him a sympathetic look from across the room. He did not acknowledge it. Emmeline Voss was still. She had gone very still the way she did. I had seen it before at Aldраth, when something struck her, not frightened still, but thinking still, measuring still. "I see," she said at last. Which was, I noted, precisely what he had said when I told him she was gone. Perhaps they deserved each other. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You owe me nothing," she said. "I was employed, I was let go. This is the ordinary way of things." "It is not," he said. Not in the manner of it. You were of more value to that house than Corrigan or any solicitor I employ or anyone else on that staff, including me, and I knew it, and I said nothing. "Why?" she said. It was a quiet word. Not sharp. She was never sharp, but precise. She was asking the real question, not whether he was sorry, which he plainly was, but why he had stood in his study and said she has a good reference and let her go into the dark. The Duke was quiet. He was looking at her with the look I had never seen on him before. Not the look of a man who has decided something, but the look of a man who is deciding, right now, in this room, whether to say a thing he has never said. He said it. "Because I did not know how to ask you to stay without it meaning something," he said. "And I was not ready at that time to mean something." Emmeline Voss looked at him for a long time. Outside, the harbor went on with its business. A gull went over. The smell of salt air came through the window on its own quiet schedule. "And now," she said. "Now," he said, "I have come 60 miles in a hired coach in February. I think that tells you where I have arrived." There was a pause. I held myself very still near the door because I am a professional. "You are asking me to return to Aldrath," she said carefully, in the tone of a woman who intends to understand precisely what is being asked. "I am asking you to return," he said, "not as a companion, not as a staff member, as—" He stopped. He did not have, it was clear, a great facility with the language of the thing he was trying to say. He was better at numbers and letters and the management of drainage fields. He tried again. "I am asking you to consider, to permit me to be given an opportunity." Emmeline Voss picked up her pen, looked at it, and set it down again. Then she looked at him with the gray eyes that gave nothing away except, I thought, everything, to someone who had learned to look. "You are asking me," she said, with the faintest thing in her voice that might, in a woman less contained, have been a smile, "whether you may court me." The Duke of Tharwick looked as though he had been struck, and then as though the striking had been, in some important sense, a relief. "Yes," he said, "that is what I am asking." "And you drove 60 miles to ask it in a shipping office." "I drove 60 miles to ask it wherever you were," he said. "You did not make yourself easy to find." "I wasn't trying to be found," she said. "No," he said, "I know. That is perhaps the thing that—" He paused. "That is what made the finding necessary." She looked at him for another long moment. The young clerk beside her had given up all pretense of working, and was staring at the ledger with the face of a man who is learning a great deal. "You should know," she said, "that I am not going to be grateful, not in the way that makes a woman easy. I have been grateful before for positions, for references, for a roof. And I have decided that I am done with the kind of gratitude that requires a person to make herself smaller." "Good," he said, with some force. "And I am not going to leave off a position that I have earned and packed up my things and follow you home in the same coach today, as though the last 3 weeks were a dream and I have been waiting." "I know," he said, "I'm not asking that." "What are you asking?" He was quiet. "Then, I am asking you to give me a chance to earn something. I don't know the word for it, except that I know it's the only thing I've wanted since January, and that I've eaten perhaps 8 dinners in 4 weeks, and that I've started 3 letters to you and could not finish any of them." Emmeline looked at him with the look of a woman who is filing information in its correct place, precisely, without haste. "I have your letter," she said. He was still. "I beg your pardon." "The one you left in the fireplace," she said. "Mrs. Peel retrieved it. She thought I might want it." She was, now there was something in her voice, and it was not quite a smile, but it was close, not wrong. A pause, during which the Duke of Tharwick showed every sign of a man who has just learned that something deeply private has had an audience, and who finds, against all his instincts, that he does not entirely mind. "She should not have done that," he said. "No," said Emmeline, "but she did, and it was informative." It wasn't finished, he said. I know, she said. The things it contained were clear enough without the ending. She looked at him, he looked at her. Outside, the gull came back on a different heading. I will think about it, she said. I want one day. I am in the middle of the February accounts, and I will finish them today, and I will give you my answer tomorrow morning. The Duke held her gaze. Then he said, all right. You'll need somewhere to stay. The anchor and sail on the north side of the front keeps a decent room. I know how to find a room, he said, with a touch of his old dryness. Good, she said. Then I'll see you at 8 tomorrow morning. At the door of this office, not in it. I won't have the client startled twice. 8 o'clock, he said. And eat something tonight, she said. Cook would want me to say that. He looked at her, startled, I think, at the precision of it, at the fact that she had known, or guessed, or Mrs. Peel had told her, at the fact that it was the first ordinary, direct, warm thing she had said to him in this room, and it was not a concession or a romantic declaration. It was simply the truth of someone who paid attention. Yes, he said, all right. He picked up his hat. He turned to go. At the door he paused and said without turning back, Miss Voss. Your Grace. I'm glad you're well. It was not a grand speech. It was, for a man like Caspian Aldred, more or less the equivalent of one. I am, she said. Come back at 8. We stayed at the Anchor and Sail, which was clean and cold and served a decent mutton pie, and for the first time in approximately 4 weeks the Duke of Tharwick ate a full meal. He ate it without speaking, and I ate mine across from him and did not speak either, because some things are better left to happen in quiet. After dinner he sat by the fire in the parlor of the inn and looked at it, and I brought him a glass of brandy and sat down myself, because in 11 years of service there are some evenings when the formality of employer and servant dissolves naturally into something older and plainer, and this was one of them. She kept the letter, he said. Mrs. Peel has a romantic nature, I said. She had no business sending it. No, I agreed. But she cares about Miss Voss, as do we all. He held his glass and looked at the fire. He was not distressed, I thought. He was something else, something that in a man less guarded would have looked like relief, as though a thing he had been carrying under his coat for months had been set down briefly, and he was working out what it felt like to have his hands free. You should have told me sooner, he said, that the household was. I did tell you, I said. He looked at me. You told me to thank her. I told you to go and find out, I said, which is not the same thing, but the instruction was the same. A pause. She's not going to make it easy, he said. No, I said, she's not. I suspect you'd have found it much less interesting if she were. He made a sound that might, on a man of easier disposition, have been a laugh. I've never courted anyone, he said. It was stated as a fact without self-pity, which was his way. You haven't, I agreed. I've no idea what I'm doing. Very few people do at first, I said. The main thing is to continue. You've managed 60 miles and a shipping office. I'd call that a reasonable start. He looked into his fire for a while. Then he said, my mother liked her very much. Your mother was a perceptive woman, I said. She never said anything, not to me. She wouldn't have had to, I said. You'd have noticed for yourself eventually. He looked at me. Eventually, he said. Well, I said, you're here. At 8 o'clock the next morning the February sky was still gray, but the wind had dropped, and the harbor was very quiet except for the business of a few early boats, and the cry of gulls, and the sound of a door opening. I stood back, as a good witness stands, and watched Emmeline Voss come out of the door of Harcourt Shipping in her plain dark dress and her sensible boots, and with her gray eyes that gave nothing away. And I watched her stop on the step and look at the Duke of Tharwick, who stood on the cobblestones of the harbor front with his hat in his hand like a man who has arrived at a place he did not know he was trying to reach. She came down the step. She stopped in front of him, close enough that the salt wind moved the loose strand of her hair that was always escaping the knot. "I've been thinking," she said. "Yes," he said. "About what you said, about not being ready before." "Yes. I think," she said carefully, "that I understand it. I think I have spent a good deal of my life not saying things for the same reason, because if you say them, they mean something. And meaning something is, it requires a person to be ready to lose something." "Yes," he said quietly. "I wasn't ready either," she said. "I left before dawn because it was easier than staying and knowing you wouldn't ask me to stay. That was not," she paused, "that was not the bravest thing I have ever done." He looked at her. Then he said, "You came 60 miles south." "You came 60 miles south," she corrected him. "I was already here." The ghost of a smile in his eyes. Fair point. She looked at him for a long moment, in the way she had that was always measuring, always precise. "I'll come back to Aldrath," she said. "Not immediately. I owe Mr. Harcott a fortnight's notice and I mean to give it properly, but yes, I'll come back." He was still. "Then I'll wait. And I'll require," she paused, looking for perhaps the first time in my acquaintance with her, slightly uncertain of her footing, though she recovered immediately. "I'll require it to be clear, what it is, not managed around the edges, not implied, clear." "It will be clear," he said. "I am aware that is overdue." "It is overdue," she agreed, without any particular heat. She was not angry, she was simply accurate, which is a different thing and, in my opinion, more formidable. He looked at her. He did not reach for her hand, they were in the street, and he was not that sort of man, not yet, not in public, but he held her gaze with the look I had not seen before January, the look that was not the Duke of Tharwick managing his affairs, but simply Caspian, who had finally said the true thing and found it had not destroyed him. "In a fortnight," he said. "In a fortnight," she said. "And Gideon," she looked past him to where I stood, "you can tell Mrs. Peel that I'll want my old room if it's available. And that I found the letter very much to the purpose, and she did the right thing, although she wasn't supposed to." I inclined my head. "I'll tell her exactly that," I said. Emmeline Voss looked back at the Duke of Tharwick. He looked back at her. The harbor went on around them, gray and cold and entirely indifferent. "8 o'clock," she said. "Same as this morning in a fortnight." "I'll be at the door," he said. "I know," she said. And for the first time since he had walked into the shipping office the day before, she smiled, not the almost smile she had allowed herself, but the actual thing, full and brief and entirely her own, and went back inside. I have worked for Caspian Aldred for 11 years, and in all that time I have held many things with discretion. The letters he does not send, the grief he does not name, the 3 London seasons he survived without once admitting he was lonely. On the harbor front at Thornhaven in February, I held the image of his face when she smiled, and I have held it since, because it is the face of a man who has found the specific thing he did not know was missing, which is the best thing a face can do. He ate a good breakfast before we left. He read on the way back, actually read, I mean, turning pages at the reasonable pace of a man who is in his own body again. And when we came up the Aldrath Drive in the early afternoon, and the house came into view, gray and large and winter cold, he looked at it with the particular look of a man who is seeing something as it will be, not only as it is. She came back, as she said she would, in a fortnight. Corrigan was quietly reassigned to the Eastern office, which was further away and required a good deal of travel. Emmeline Voss moved into her old room and resumed her habits, the unhurried walk down the corridors, the precise knowledge of every person's name, the reading of the estate reports on Thursday afternoons, now done at the desk beside the Duke's. He courted her with a thoroughness that was, in its way, characteristic, slowly, deliberately, with the attention of a man who had decided this was a thing worth doing correctly. He told her things, which was the hardest part for him, and which she received without fanfare. She argued with him about the South pasture management, and about a drainage proposal from the new land agent, and about the kitchen cat, whose kitten had been renamed in her absence and whose new name she found insufficiently dignified. She was right about all of it. In November, in the library, in front of no one but the kitchen cat's kitten, who had by then outgrown the question of dignity, he asked her. She said yes without making him wait this time, because she said she had already waited in the shipping office at Harcott's while he drove 60 miles, and that constituted sufficient suspense for a lifetime. They were married in April, in the village church, in a small ceremony with Mrs. Peel in the front pew and the boot boy in his good coat and old Mr. Cavell presiding, and the only fanfare was the kitchen cat's kitten escaping from the house and arriving at the church door in time to observe proceedings, which Emmeline considered appropriate. I stood where I always stand at occasions of significance in this household, near the door, slightly back, where the view is good and I am out of the way. I watched her take his arm. I watched his face. 11 years is a long time to know a man. Long enough to know when he has found the thing that he had been, without ever admitting it, even to himself, looking for. Long enough to recognize the particular quality of a man's stillness when he has arrived, at last, somewhere he means to stay. She did not look like a woman who had been waiting to be chosen. She looked like a woman who had made her own way to a place that had turned out, after all, to be where she belonged, not because it was given to her, but because she had earned it and walked away from it once and come back on her own terms. That, I have always thought, is the only way it should be.